at Wired Magazine and a fellow here at the New America Foundation. And before the election, Wired decided we wanted to run something about the election, but we're not a political magazine, we're not a partisan magazine, so we had a little hard time coming up with what we'd actually do. So we settled on, let's try to find the smartest people we possibly can, not just smart people, but people who have very good ideas for changing America in some way or another, and let's get people who would be good to advise the president, regardless of who's elected, whether it's Obama or whether it's McCain. So we looked far and wide, we find lots of people. We didn't want people who just sort of liked Wired things, have been pushing them forever and not getting anywhere because they're not going to get anywhere. We wanted to find people who have new ideas, brilliant ideas, and ideas that actually could work and that could change things. So we looked far and wide. We found 15 of them. We wrote them all up. They're in this issue. You can find mini profiles of them with their great ideas, what they're planning to do. And then we invited them to this panel here at the New America Foundation. There's a great synchronicity. Wired and New America are both places that are looking for ideas. They're not partisan. They're looking for new thinking. And they're looking for ways to convince the next president, whether it be Obama, whether it be McCain, that they can follow new innovative paths to all sorts of strange, interesting solutions. So we have 4 very different ideas and 4 very different proposals coming. The first we're going to hear from Parag Khanna. He's the director of the Global Governance Initiative here at New America. He's just put out a book called The Second World. And he's going to talk to us about why the next president's foreign policy should be orchestrated completely differently and be completely differently from the way it has been forever. So, then we have Montgomery McFate. She'll be speaking second. She has an interesting story. About 7 years ago, she has all sorts of PhDs and JDs, but she was unemployed. And 7 years ago, she was sitting in a bar, and she's got a PhD in anthropology, and she started doodling on a napkin, and she wrote, "How can I get the military to think about anthropology?" So she took that napkin, she sent it into the military, and she was hired. And since then, she's she's head of the human terrain system. She's been praised by. She's changing the way that the military is acting in Iraq, and she's going to talk to us about how the military can change the way it operates in foreign countries in the future. How do we prepare for the next war? When we go into another country, what do we have to learn about them? What do we have to learn about ourselves and the way we interact with them? So she's been praised by Petrea. She's been praised by everybody. She's changed the military now. She'll change it more in the future. Third, we're going to have Robert Dalrymple. He's a coastal engineer and a civil engineering professor at Johns Hopkins. And he deals with disasters. Not that Montgomery McFate doesn't deal with disasters, also, or Parag. But weather disasters. So we're entering a new era of exciting weather, as we've all seen, both because of the way we've built our cities, the way we've built our societies, global warming, climate change. We're having a lot of problems, and we're going to have more in the future. And he has some brilliant and some fascinating ideas for how we can minimize the damage, how we can avoid them, how we can evacuate, how we can build up our cities. So he'll be speaking third and showing some slides. And then fourth, we have Mitchell Joachim, who's a professor at Columbia, and he's an architect, and he's a partner at Terraform. And his ideas, he wants to change the entire way our transportation system is set up and the entire way our cities are built. He wants us to have collapsible cars, for example. If we had those, we all could have parked a lot more easily. You'll see some slides about those. Wants to change the way people commute. Wants to change the way water works. He wants to change it so that cities aren't built up of things that are actually toxic for the world, but they're actually nutrients. So he's going to show us some slides and talk about how the world will be transformed in the next 100 years. So, on those notes, let's get going with Parag Khanna.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, welcome everyone. I see big ideas posted everywhere, and my quote-unquote big idea is very conceptual, but the other members of the panel, Montgomery, Robert, and Mitchell, are living examples of what the concept is that I want to lay out to you. So I'm going to keep it brief, and I want to let them be, again, really embody the message that I'm trying to deliver here. And the one word or term that captures it is what I call multi-Americanism. For far too long, we've thought of American foreign policy as what the government does in a very complacent kind of way. Oh, Washington has to do this, the Bush administration has to change this, let's wait for the next administration to do that. That's not what foreign policy needs to be. Maybe that's what it was for hundreds of years, but we live in an era which all of us would agree we could call globalization. Globalization, if it means rethinking everything, it has to also mean rethinking the way the government operates. Now, we're actually well positioned for this. We're at a time when American leverage and foreign policy is considered to be very low, but America is still this most globalized, open, innovative society in the world. It's just that, as I said, the government is not. Now, this is a unique opportunity to exercise or implement what I call multi-Americanism. And the key principle here to understand is that American society's footprint in the world, not the American government, American society, is greater, far greater than that of just the American government. What are the most recognizable brands in the world? They're American corporations. What are the most coveted roles for Americans overseas or by people overseas for Americans? As educators. Who does the best development work? It's American NGOs, not the American government. But we lack a foreign policy approach or method to foreign policy that synergizes what America as a whole can offer to the world. Instead, we, again, complacently think about what is the White House doing, what is the State Department doing, what is DOD doing. But that's just a few thousand people, and that's just the government and the limited amount of money, resources, and knowledge that it has. That is not a foreign policy that's commensurate with the globalization age and with what America can do. We have interagency processes. That's the best the government can muster when it comes to getting together various functional expertise in a room. I'm talking about something significantly different. I'm calling for an intra-American process, not just an interagency process, a process in which the collective expertise, and again, the people on this panel are really a microcosm of that, need to be at the table, not just in implementing, but in thinking about how to achieve our foreign policy objectives. We already are in a situation where Americans have their own foreign policies independent, in a way, of the United States government. Google has its own foreign policy. It only opened an office here recently. Arnold Schwarzenegger has his own climate policy. There are sub-state entities exercising their own outreach around the world for trade, investment, technology, everything. The Gates Foundation most definitely has its own foreign policy around the world. And it's not the first time that an NGO has set a standard or an example for where the government follows rather than leads. Oxfam in the UK arguably shapes DFID, the British Development Agency's policy, more than the reverse. So this is falling in line with a pattern towards engaging and leveraging what civil society and the private sector already do. Let's just look at one area, public diplomacy. For 8 years, we're on our fourth Undersecretary of State for Public Affairs and Public Diplomacy. Really arguably with zero progress that's been made, whether you measure it in terms of inputs, what good ideas have gone into public diplomacy, or outputs if you measure it by opinion polls. Last 8 years, the most critical period for the way in which we're perceived around the world has been a complete disaster. And why is that? Because it's been an anti-globalization kind of approach. Centralizing a message is not possible today in a globalized world. So this, despite this decentralized kind of knowledge environment, we still have, and the majority of efforts still focus on what to do about this one vertical cone, the Undersecretary of State for Public Affairs and Public Diplomacy. I think it should be abolished. I think that the idea of having a message around what you do as a government or a society should be horizontally integrated, not vertically integrated. It needs to be packaged into the activities of what every department does, what every foreign service officer does, and those things can be done in partnership with American NGOs and companies a whole lot better than they're being done now. Look at what we've done in trying to create and fund taxpayer money, TV stations around the world in Arabic and otherwise. They've been complete and utter failures. We should have been partnering more with private media, both in the U.S. and overseas. So what I'm calling for with multi-Americanism are these issue-oriented kinds of networks between public and private sectors. And it ranges from intelligence. People who focus and study open source intelligence are still banging their heads against the wall because there's very little penetration and structured kind of relationships. On paper, sure, it's all there, but it's not exercised in a regimented kind of way. Poverty reduction, I mentioned the Gates Foundation, other NGOs that have had, especially those that now work in microcredit and other areas that have far better, more progressive, effective, efficient, cost-effective strategies for poverty reduction than anything that you'll see coming out of USAID. and even alternative energy, where of course American corporations are in the lead in this and may hold the solution to some of the sticky diplomatic issues we have bilaterally with China and India in terms of getting low-cost technology or rather a more efficient technology over to those countries while the bilateral diplomacy sort of stalls. You know, it's often said that America's best ambassadors are Peace Corps volunteers and the worst ones are DynCorp employees. And that may be true, but they have one thing in common, and that's that the government is already, in this ad hoc way, outsourcing some elements of its foreign policy goals, whether it's to college students or to contractors. So there already is potential for this, but we're missing the method or the structures in Washington and elsewhere that bring together all of this talent that we have, again, all the talent that's right here on this stage and beyond, into thinking about how we pursue our objectives overseas. This is a new model for how to actually formulate and exercise foreign policy. Again, if America is the most open, innovative, dynamic society in the world, we can move ahead, create this kind of model, adapt to globalization, and I think we'll find that it is something that other governments may then seek to replicate. And of course, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I think we might see our global stock rise again if we leverage all those resources. So I'll stop right there. Pass it on.
Thank you, Parag. Next, we're going to have Montgomery McFate. And before we do that, just a little bit about structure. They're all going to talk for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to have a little bit of a panel discussion on how to implement big ideas generally, not just these specific ones, but you know, a lot of people here probably have their own big ideas for the next president. How do you actually get them through? How do you get the president to do something that hasn't been done before? And then after that, we're going to have a question and answer period. So start thinking of how you're going to grill everybody. So Montgomery McFate.
Hi, thanks everybody for coming today. I'm surprised to see so many people here given that it's Washington and there are so many other alternative afternoon entertainments available to you. I'm very flattered to have been selected for this immense honor and hardly feel that I deserve it, given that I think there are probably people in this room who are much smarter than I am. I just happen to have luck and timing in my favor. I think I'm kind of unusual on this panel because my idea has already been implemented by the U.S. Army in the form of the human terrain system. As Nick alluded to, HTS started with a vision, and now we have close to 400 people working in the program, and we're worth about $120 million a year. So if I were in the private sector, I would be very wealthy now, but I'm not. The basic idea of this program and everything that I've tried to do in my professional life in Washington, D.C. is to figure out how you can use sociocultural knowledge in Iraq and Afghanistan to help the military be more effective in its operations and use less lethal force, and that's the key. It's certainly in many ways not a new idea. If you go back and read Sun Tzu or T. Lawrence or Herodotus, you'll find the seeds of what I'm talking about there. This has been part of military thinking for a very long time. It's also not purely my idea. I've been incredibly blessed to have the assistance of amazing colleagues who put their blood, sweat, and tears into this project, literally in some cases, and some of them are in this room. So what's interesting about this project that we did is that we did it from the bottom up, and in many ways we turned the entire Army system of thinking about projects, programs, acquisitions on its head. And we've discovered that it works. The question now is, if we've been very successful in helping brigades plan and conduct operations, is there a way that you could migrate this capability or this way of thinking and approaching problems up the chain of command? And that's what I'm interested in now. So I would like to remind you that in November 2007, Condoleezza Rice, reflecting on the mistakes of the war in an interview with Newsweek magazine, said that the importance, I'm quoting, the importance of local, provincial, and tribal authorities was not self-evident in Iraq. So policy planning at the highest level in this country was done without the benefit of much knowledge about how the society of Iraq worked, and was made on the basis of how other Arab societies worked, who have much more highly centralized government than that of Iraq. This fact, it was a knowable thing. You could have gone down the street and talked to Phoebe Marr, Amatzia Baram, Fala Jabbar, Judith Yaffe. These people exist and they could have provided this information. And this is not to cast blame. I'm really not trying to cast blame here. I just want to point out that the United States government, in all domains that I've discovered so far, has what you might call a cultural knowledge gap. And the question to me now that we've done this program at the tactical and operational level, is how do we, citizens and public servants alike, how do we bridge that gap and how do we repair the situation that we find ourselves in now? There are a lot of specific ways that this could be done. I'm not a foreign policy expert, but I do know something about how the government works, and these are my quick and dirty ideas. The first one really is about education. I think that it's incredibly important that this country be better educated about other places in the world. One thing that can be done very easily is that the National Science Education Program, the so-called Bourne Fellowships, could be expanded to support undergraduate education. The Peace Corps service should probably result in loan forgiveness. On the military end, a lot of the war colleges and especially the academies have a very strong focus on science and technology, in particular engineering. These things in the curriculum of our military educational system, they need to be balanced with geography, foreign languages, etc. At the moment, for the most part, they're not. Research. This is something that the United States government, and I don't just mean the Department of Defense, should invest in. Of the total federal social science budget, okay, got that? Total federal social science budget of $1.2 billion, which includes both basic and applied research, from 2002 to 2004, the Department of Defense spent 1%, right? So there's not a lot of investment being made in this area, and an investment does need to be made in systematic, on-the-ground social science research in countries where it's possible that the U.S. may have involvement, whether that's humanitarian action, whether that's an emerging conflict, et cetera, or whether that's just where we have diplomatic interests. The third thing is that one of the surprises to me when I came to Washington, especially when I started working with the Department of Defense, is that there is no wizard behind the curtain. And in some ways, I would have felt better if I had pulled the curtain back and discovered that somebody was in charge. But in fact, the truth of the matter is that nobody is in charge. The DoD is like it's like a monstrous hydra. And it creates a lot of challenges. I want to read you a quote from a friend of mine who was on the National Security Council between 2003 and 2005. He said, "Nobody could tell the three-star commander of 5th Corps what the people in Baghdad cared about. Nobody could tell him what the psyche of Iraqis was like." And part of the problem here is that members of the 5th Corps staff had no idea where to find this information inside the federal government or even whether it existed. So what I'm pointing out to you here with this example is that this is a systemic problem about organization, about how we organize ourselves, both in the foreign policy community and in the State Department and in the Department of Defense, and it needs to be addressed. I'm not quite sure how to do that myself, but I can tell you that it involves process, coordination, and organization, and also lines of authority. That if you want things to get done in the Department of Defense, or really in any organization, you have to put somebody in charge. And right now, nobody is in charge of this stuff, so it simply doesn't get done. And I want to leave you with a quote. It's one of my favorites. It's from Sherman Kent, who was one of the founders of the CIA, and he wrote this in 1949. He said that strategic intelligence was, quote, "the kind of knowledge a state must possess regarding other states in order to assure itself that its causes will not suffer, nor its undertakings fail, because its statesmen and soldiers plan and act in ignorance." And I would like to make sure that in this country we never plan or act in ignorance again. Thanks.
Hi. Dr. Dalrymple.
Thank you, Nick. I'm a coastal engineer, so I look at the interaction between humans and the oceans and our coastlines. And for about 35 years, I've had an academic career where I've looked at the science and the technology of how we interact with our coastlines. And it wasn't until the tsunami in 2004 when I went to Thailand that I realized that there are significant human consequences of living at the shoreline. And then shortly thereafter, I went to see the damage that Katrina had wrought on New Orleans as part of the first engineering team that went into the city after the flooding, and to look at why the walls failed. So one thing we'll look at is some of these natural disasters at the coastlines, and the damage costs are rising. So we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars now for hurricanes. And as you see, 6 of the 10 most costly hurricanes have occurred in the last 4 years. And this is because we're into a new storminess cycle. There's the potential that storms will get stronger with climate change. And people live at the shoreline, and we're investing more in terms of housing at the shoreline. I was at Long Beach, New Jersey last weekend, and if you look at the amount of real estate that's located about 2 feet above the storm tide level last weekend, it's just phenomenal. Furthermore, 50% of the U.S. shoreline population lives within 50 miles of the shoreline, and this is true worldwide. Our people live at the shoreline for lots of reasons, partially with commerce and harbors and so forth. So costs are going up. We recently had Hurricane Ike, as you know, in the Galveston, Houston area. So we have some before and after pictures from the USGS, and there are plenty of these pictures. One of the things that has, I think the U.S. government has done very, very well is the National Hurricane Center and the warning system, so that we get 5-day predictions of where these storms are going. Now, these predictions are made from lots of models, and they sort of average the results because they're all disparate, and they average them and they say, okay, here's where we think it's going to go. These warnings are extraordinarily important. They've saved thousands of lives, but they still have problems. I mean, I think people die still because the warnings are not quite good enough. The fineness of the warnings can be better because the storms turn at the last minute, and there are significant consequences. Evacuation and evacuation routes are extremely important for our cities. We've got this high density at the shoreline, and we have to evacuate in days or one day, move people out of the way. People are looking at this issue, but it's a critical issue. I think people died during Hurricane Ike because of their sour experience during Hurricane Rita, that they were on the highway and it took them 40 hours to go a distance that they usually did in an hour and a half. So evacuation routes are critical. I don't know how many of you saw this picture from Hurricane Ike in the New York Times, but the interesting thing is, first of all, the Bolivar Peninsula is not a good place to situate your house. But if you do, you can make it survive if you design it correctly. So houses did survive, some didn't. So you have 2 options, and as a nation we have 2 options. One is we don't allow people to live in harm's way, which makes good sense, but people like to live at the shoreline. So the other option is, why don't we design and have building codes that require them to build homes that will survive so that we don't have to rebuild them. The 100-year storm design is what most people design to. I think this is an inadequate standard. If you look at a 100-year storm, if we have a 30-year mortgage on the house, you got 1 chance in 4 you're going to lose the house in that 30-year time. So the 100-year storm doesn't mean you can wait 100 years and the next storm comes. The other thing is how we design for the 100-year storm. People design a house for the 100-year flood elevation and so forth. But what we also have to do is figure out the consequences of when that 100-year storm occurs. So people design beach houses for a 100-year storm. We designed New Orleans for a 100-year storm. That was a disaster because the consequences of the flooding was hundreds of billions of dollars and 2,000 lives. So let's look at the problem with New Orleans. If you can see this, we have New Orleans surrounded by a lake at the top, Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Bourne to the east, and then the wetlands of the Mississippi River Delta to the south. And the wetlands are disappearing at a dramatic rate, 24 square miles per year. And this is a buffer between the Gulf of Mexico and the city, and it's going away rapidly. It's designed the hurricane protection system, and it's being rebuilt at 100-year protection. So in the next 30 years, we got a 25% chance of those walls being overtopped again. The problem is a very difficult one. The wetlands are going away. The wetlands are extraordinarily important as a storm buffer, but also in terms of marine life and basically the marine productivity of the area. But we have lots of problems going on. The Mississippi River that built the deltas is not bringing down the sediment that it used to, so the deltas are not building now. They're washing away. We have soil consolidation. We have sea level rise, which of course we think is going to go up. And then we have channelization, so there are a lot of canals that are cut through the wetlands for oil and gas. So extraordinarily difficult problems. So what do? One is we need to build a better hurricane protection system. In the Netherlands, they designed for a 10,000-year storm. We designed for a 100-year storm. That's orders of magnitude different. So we need a better system. We need to restore the wetlands. The present plans for restoring the wetlands and what the Corps of Engineers are doing now, you can see at the bottom there's two different things, Carnarvon, freshwater diversion. They divert the river during times of flood to let some sediment flow into the wetlands. But the river is bringing lots of sediment down, half of what it used to, but it's still bringing a lot of sediment down, and it's jetting out the end of the river and dropping into the Gulf of Mexico. So we're wasting it. It's something we need in the wetlands. Because the levees are on the river, it doesn't flood into the wetlands like it used to naturally. We're wasting sediment to the Gulf of Mexico. So let's reroute the mouth of the Mississippi River. Let's have the river, instead of going into deep water, have it go out onto the continental shelf. That's sufficient for navigation, but it keeps the sediment on the shelf, and it can be reworked into the wetlands. Tsunamis. So this is the Indian Ocean tsunami, the most videotaped and photographed tsunami in history because it happened in tourist areas around the Indian Ocean. What if it happened here? What if it happened in California? We have the best tsunami warning system in the Pacific Ocean. It's a wonderful system. But do we know, in fact, that people will respond? And so there is public education, but how many people would have died in the U.S. had it happened here? And we have a place it can happen, several places. One is the Cascadia Fault off the coast of the state of Washington. It created a tsunami in 1700, and geologists think it's on about a 300-year return interval. So we're due. On the East Coast, we have things like slumping of the continental shelf. So here's a picture looking at the bottom, and you'll see at the bottom of that picture is a place where the edge of the continental shelf is slipped into the abyssal part of the ocean. That creates a tsunami. And so we have the whole east coast of the U.S. There are things called methane hydrates that are frozen methane gas that are on the shelf, and people are worried about with sea level warming or sea warming with climate change that the methane hydrates will start going out of ice and into gas and release a lot of sediments. So this may increase. Furthermore, we've got the same kind of faults like we're in the Indian Ocean in Puerto Rico, and historically there have been tsunamis in the Caribbean. And then there's this big bugaboo of what happens if volcanoes collapse. So you've got volcanoes in the Canary Islands, the Hawaiian Islands, and they're evidence of the volcanoes collapsing, and so big landslides into the ocean creating tsunamis. So we have plenty of sources. So what are the remedies? Well, we don't have an East Coast warning system nor public education about it on the East Coast. And then we need to research the risk. And I'm telling you this, it sounds kind of scary, but you know, if it doesn't happen for 100,000 years, it may not be that important. So we need to research it. Finally, a natural hazard that's going on all the time that we don't pay much attention to is shoreline erosion. So it's been estimated that 85% of the coast of the U.S. is eroding away. On the east and Gulf Coast, just the insured property alone is $11 trillion. Now we're talking about disasters on the scale of financial disasters. But the beaches provide a buffer between the ocean and the coastal communities. Beaches are important. Beaches in the past, the last time I checked, this was pre-9/11, but beaches generated more foreign exchange than manufactured goods exported abroad. Beaches generate more foreign exchange than our national parks do. Visitors coming from abroad, going to Miami Beach alone is an immense amount of money coming to the U.S. Yet we don't pay any attention to them. They're just there. Local communities need to take care of them. And the federal government does put a little bit of money into it, but it's minuscule. So we need to preserve our beaches and, of course, as I said before, our wetlands. One of the biggest problems with coastal erosion are tidal inlets. You notice the one on the left, Indian River Inlet. There's a lot of sand on one side and no sand on the other side, and that's even with the state of Delaware pumping sand across the inlet to replace the natural processes. So there's erosion to the north. Down here in Florida, Lake Worth, Florida, you see a lot of sand on one side, not much on the other side, a lot of erosion. Same thing with Manasquan. We have hundreds of inlets and hundreds of beaches being destroyed on one side or the other of those inlets. So, in terms of recommendations, with coastal hazards of all sorts, better prediction, better warnings, and education. And this is research and education. And the education is both educating people to know about it and educating the public. Coastal design can and must be improved. This is the 100-year design, or the risk, thinking about risk in our designs, but making things stronger if we want them to survive. And then finally, our coastal resources must be preserved, conserved, or restored in terms of wetlands and beaches. Thanks.
Dr. J.
Give me 1 second. I'm going from Mac to IBM, so hold on. Hi, I'm Dr. Mitchell Joachim. I'm from Brooklyn. So I run an organization, a nonprofit called Terraform One. We're a philanthropic, humanitarian, architecture, and urban design collaborative. Thank you to Wired and the New American Foundation for having me today. So I'm going to show you some work that we do there. Essentially inventions about the future, the very near future and the very far future, and they all revolve around the rubric of city ecology and mobility. One of these devices, here's kind of a new one, called the New York City River Gym. It's a human-powered boat, or powered by the human buttocks, and you revolve around Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, New York, etc. on your way to work. It's kind of a fantastic device, especially if you're on Wall Street. You've got to get out some angst in the morning. The general principle that we run on, besides those three, is that cities have been designed around vehicles for a very, very long time. So it's about time we change that equation. We should make cars fit into the city, design vehicles to fit into the city, and make them smart, have a modicum of intelligence, just like horses used to have. Right? Be familiar with the terrain. If they run over a pothole, they can send a signal back to the municipal grid. There's a pothole there. The vehicle behind it will avoid it. Someone will come and fix it, hopefully. But at least they're all talking to one another. Cars need to do that. The city eventually will change, as that diagram's showing. So these vehicles were started to be designed at MIT. There was about 10 of us, lawyer, doctor, computation expert, architect, ecologist, etc. We were asked to design another car of the future. And, well, putting us all together in a room, we thought people will forget this car of the future after we build the thing. And, you know, the context of where that vehicle sits became very important. So instead of producing yet another object to be forgotten by the American populace, we decided to rethink mobility in cities, and that it would become one seamless profession where, you know, architects would design vehicles or trains, automotive engineers would design buildings, planners would get to do anything they feel like, and all of this would fall under this single position of ecology. Here's one such vehicle that's intelligent. It's got a signal system in the skin, either organic LEDs or e-ink, and it could send out a semiotic pulse, like the Boston Red Sox are great or whatever. And this would connect into the rest of the city, so there would be this intelligent veneer constantly talking and signaling, vehicles moving in this contiguous network. It would also affect the environment. So wherever someone's looking out in the skin, right, it would produce an aperture point or track the sun, for instance. So you can have a visor revolve around a fully transparent skin. We changed the structure of these vehicles. In fact, we actually really didn't concentrate on cars. We did so many of them, was put the entire notion of mobility in a wheel. So you have everything that you need, drivetrain, suspension, braking, in a wheel. You can add any envelope you want, any carriage. So the wheel became the horse, a very smart horse that would talk to all the other horses, moving in this kind of gentle congestion. Then you can rethink the structure and the envelope of vehicles. Here's one example of many. This is an articulated chassis. It's a city car designed for downtown cores to solve what we call the last kilometer problem. You can get about 880 of these vehicles on a New York City block, as opposed to 30 SUVs. Why? Because they interlock and stand up when they park. There it is. They're a wireless drive-by-wire vehicle, so there's no mechanical linkages. You kind of talk to the thing. It's a social vehicle. It knows where you like to go and where your favorite coffee place is or where your friends are. Next vehicle comes in. That one also articulates and stands up. It's now charging via induction underneath the street. Lithium-ion batteries are embedded all throughout the chassis of the car. And it's a shared ownership model. So you don't own this car, right? You can just take the next one, right? You buy into a system similar to Zipcar. This is a more futuristic version where all these become really soft. So if we put the entire vehicle in the wheel, frees up the architects and designers to do anything we want with the envelope. And what I liked is, social mobility, spaces of pleasure and event. It's okay to rub up against somebody or scuff them accidentally instead of moving around in these precious metal don't touch me boxes, right? That's the cars we have today. So what are these, we're thinking of this constant flow of moving and talking vehicles that are allowed to rub up or flock together. What does that do as far as phasing with these hard vehicles in the city? Well, these sheep cars, if you will, kind of team up and gather around a large Hummer, and they can move it off to the side of the road as they can talk to one another. And they phase in this grid. This is one of these sheep cars that I designed. So the principle here, because we weren't working for General Motors, our sponsor, they were just giving us the money, we came up with some big codes that you'd probably get fired for if you were an engineer there, which is that no one will ever die in a car accident again. So that meant we'll design it for zero death. It would be impossible. So this is essentially intended to, if it somehow fails computationally, accidentally hits your sister or something, it would tickle her as opposed to kill her. So the car is super, super lightweight and doesn't go faster than 30 miles an hour. Doesn't need to. This is from Europe. Thank you, the smart car that they've designed. This is one of our latest designs. Same footprint, so you get 800 of them on a city block park. But these two wheels drive together, so it stands up, just like the other one, and they interlock. The ingress and egress position of the car was also important. I don't know how you feel about getting in and out of a car, but it's incredibly inelegant. So here the seats are perfect for human ergonomics. You can sit down. There's a cover to protect you from the elements, and off you go. And they're connected to the infrastructure. Here, there's some notion of renewable energy being produced. Also something that these cars are actually not even cars, they're mobile batteries to recharge the entire system of the city locally, wherever they go. This vehicle is not doing jumping jacks, but essentially it's using the armature of the wheels to go vertically into the city, separating passenger from freight transit. Here it goes further up. And here connecting into the circulatory systems of skyscrapers. And you have the extra added opportunity of wind turbines off the shelf to produce even further energy. Another solution, an air-based one, also rather new, not seen before, is called the blimp bumper bus for New York City. So this is the Thanksgiving Day parade every day, essentially. These things move very low to the ground. They can go over water. The chairs are very soft. and they're very long tentacles. You kind of grab onto a tentacle and sit on a chair like a ski lift, and you go for 40 blocks and just get off. It's on the fly, never needs to stop. You'd have a tenant or somebody making sure nothing crazy happens. Here they are connected into this smart dot street, which is too long of an explanation to get into, but essentially it's privileging pedestrians and bicycles. I think ultimately the future city should have the alpha position of the foot being its primary interface. I think people are better than vehicles ultimately. Getting on to even deeper in ecology here, because we're architects, thought of a very old system of gardening called pleaching, and using this to make houses. These are trees that have been grafted together, or an osculation, it's called. What we do is we've actually been making tree houses for a very long time, and actually pleaching for even longer, about 2,500 years. But what we're doing here is we're taking scaffolds driven by computational geometry to make a home that's 100% ecological. Right? There's no compromise in this system. We don't need lead, which is okay. This home fits into the metabolism of its local ecology. We use computers to do it in a very sophisticated manner and get 7 decimal places of accuracy. Because that one we've had for some time, it's very tough to grow. We've had the 50% version so that we can get it out there quicker. And this falls within the standards of building construction. It's a typical wood frame construction, but the infill is living components or energy components, components that will produce energy. This is a grid of the climactic vectors on that specific site and then filled out. Another project that we're doing is we're growing homes out of meat, another type of home we can do. So this one is an in vitro meat house. It's victimless, so no sentient creature was hurt in the growing of this home. There's another view of it. And we have a show in Prague, so we decided to locate this particular meat house in front of a cathedral in Prague so religion can confront it. Finally, we get to the largest scale, which is all of Manhattan redesigned to be 100% self-sufficient, right, as a thought experiment. What would that be like if it was completely self-sufficient within its own political boundaries? No inputs, no outputs. Produce your own food, deal with your own waste, recycling, water, energy, etc., all in Manhattan. So one example of an architecture there would be the footprint of a typical Kentucky Fried Chicken modified to be a vertical farm, right, where you grow dwarf corn or dwarf wheat. You have a turbine for energy. You house your workers because you're good to the people. You've got commercial space to sell the stuff, and then connecting to infrastructure below. These are some views of some of the Lower East Side, or Lower East Side, which will be in 100 years from now. And some more views of this biotic architecture. And ending on a future view of Central Park, which is essentially turned into a large farm that's producing biofuels and food for people. Thanks very much.
I think you turned my house into a wetland if I looked at that last map correctly. I noticed some synergies between the talks. Parag is basically talking about taking Montgomery's ideas in some way to our entire foreign policy. If we had Dr. Joachim's cars, we'd be able to avoid the tsunamis a lot more easily. But I want to talk about, let's talk about optimism for a little bit, because it's a day of the bailout. People are down a little bit. Things aren't looking so great, and we've got tsunamis coming. We've got a monstrous hydra in the Defense Department. We've got a foreign policy that doesn't work. And tell me, this question for all of you. If you are able to sit down with McCain or Obama, and you have 5 or 10 minutes, and afterwards he says, damn, you're right. Tell me what the best case scenario would be 4 years from now. So, Montgomery, fire away.
The best case scenario 4 years from now, given how slowly the government works, particularly the Department of Defense, I think that the possibility of seeing change happening very quickly within 4 years is minimal. However, there are a lot of stopgap things that can be done in the meantime that are process and organization oriented. The other thing that I sort of neglected to say when I was talking earlier is that the work that we've done on brigades and divisions in Iraq and Afghanistan can also be done at a much higher level at the combatant command echelon. And I think that that's something that could be done quickly that would actually have a large influence in how the United States engages with foreign countries, whether you consider it's appropriate or not for the Department of Defense to be doing something that many people would seem to think of as the domain or the bailiwick of the State Department is another matter. But given that that's the condition right now, I think that that could be done in the short term and would be effective.
Parag?
I'll sort of throw out a few countries and issues and show where we could potentially be. Take Pakistan. We could have some fledgling reconstruction opportunity zones in NWFP and FATA where you generate some employment and create the infrastructure linkage that gets some of those exports out, including some Afghan products as well, because you really don't have just an Afghanistan and Pakistan problem, you have an AFPAC problem, and there's a lot we can do for the infrastructure there to generate employment and start to, sort of drain the swamp. With Iran, I could imagine a scenario where we have a much greater sort of civilian, academic, tourist, sort of open the floodgates, as a lot of people have proposed, create a kind of, irresistible offer of investment and so forth, and bilateral exchange, such that you kind of can develop a lot more knowledge about what's going on. And then the presence of foreigners makes it difficult for there to be as much of the kind of heightened political tension and saber rattling that's going on right now. So you could have a diffused situation there. Just to look at our own situation, I think what ideally 4 years from now, and because we're starting from a very desperate financial kind of plane at the moment, but a lot more foreign capital into the American municipal sort of system to work on rebuilding our infrastructure. You're not actually going to have the green collar economy that Obama is talking about without a lot of money that we don't have, so how is it going to be funded? So we need to actually get beyond a lot of the protectionism that we're hearing all around the country and towards the kind of openness that we've had in the financial system of foreign capital. We actually need that capital to finance Main Street, not just Wall Street, and then this country could kind of move ahead and innovate and get a lot more, move a lot more of the population up the value chain. So those are a few things that I think are possible in the next 4 years. Hope we do them.
I think from the point of view of coastal hazards, the major players are the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA. And the Corps of Engineers does what Congress asked them to do. So we need to have the Corps thinking about the consequences of their actions and providing Congress with some information about what they're about and what they're doing. For example, Congress instructed the Corps of Engineers to come up with Category 5 protection for southern Louisiana. So not just New Orleans, but the entire state. And so the first reaction of the Corps was to design the Great Wall of Louisiana, which was just a barrier that went across the whole state. Well, you've got estuaries, you've got rivers, there are consequences. This is one of the greatest wetland systems in the world, and the ecological experiment that you would be trying to carry out by putting a wall in front of it is mind-boggling. And so they've modified that, but they've come up with systems of levees. So you have these little towns with little ring levees around them throughout the state. And so here's the U.S. taxpayers paying for all of these levees. And the thing about levees is if you build them, people will come and they live behind them. And they get their, they in a evidently a flood-proof place, and their insurance drops and so forth. So it encourages development into places where we don't want people to live. So I think part of it is trying to get the Corps to rethink about moving people into hazardous areas. FEMA getting states and local municipalities to, number one, educate people that live at the shoreline so that they understand the risk to their multi-million-dollar house. Rather than it just being a nice place to live, there's a lot of money at stake here. Having the building codes changed so that they're appropriate. So I think those two agencies.
Could we get a tsunami warning system or an automated system for reversing flow on highways built in the next 4 years so that it's much easier to evacuate?
I think those things are possible, yes.
All right.
Certainly the warning system. We know how to do that directly. It's already started in the West Coast.
If I had a chance to talk to one of the candidates or
Yeah.
President of the United States.
You
What
will
would I
after
tell
this
them?
meeting. They're both watching on webcast, so as
great.
long as they...
Hi. No, I'd have two answers depending on who it was. But first one is, be really interested in making a Con Ed car company, or getting power companies to consolidate to make cars and infrastructure simultaneously for those electric vehicles at first, maybe hydrogen fuel cell vehicles later. I think we've waited for the American automakers too long for them to get on board to do this, and I know they've had major meetings to consolidate, but why not get Con Ed and these companies activated to make the drivetrains and the stations to refuel or repower or distribute batteries from home to city core? I think that would be fantastic, especially since they'd be able to change the relationship of power and from a centralized location to a constantly mobile and dynamic locale. So always talking and linking and charging and dealing with peak loads or demands. I would also think that, and this is not a new idea, this is from Henry Ford. Some of you may know this, some not, but he was interested in doing something similar. He wanted to take America's fantastic agricultural economy and mix it with our great automotive economy. He wanted to essentially grow cars from soybeans, and he did. He made soybean plastic automobiles. One of the early Model Ts, there's a picture of him using an axe and smashing it up against the side of the car, and the axe bouncing off and leaving no scratch because soy-based plastic, you can impregnate the coloration inside it. So he wanted to grow cars, but we didn't. One of the reasons why is because of our American value system, which was very different then, as you know, as it is today. But back then, we never heard of the energy crises. It wasn't until Ian Illich in the 70s. And we wanted to purchase something similar to horses and carriages. So you wanted to feel like you've bought a very robust, weighty object. So, you know, metal seemed a lot more appropriate. And you didn't care if it used a ton of energy. But today, that's just absurd. So we certainly have technologies to separate drivetrains from chassis or horses from carriages. So I think we can grow the chassis part or the envelope part, and then leave the drivetrains to this mega electric company / automotive company. And we can put the automakers back to work in making those carriages and components, wheels and chassis, etc. Just we can have them stop making these engines.
I want to ask a follow-up here, which is one of the things you've talked about in previous writings of yours is that when you make something that's better for the Earth, it can't actually be worse for the people who use it, or else it won't get adopted. I think, as you said to me on the phone, you have to everything has to be underneath the hood. Tell me about a little bit more about that, and also about other lessons for how you get big ideas implemented with overcoming all of the resistance that they'll face. This is something that you all are going to have to face. I'm going to ask the same question to the three of you. What is something you've learned while struggling to change some big monstrous hydra or some organization or FEMA? Something that you've learned that can be applied to other people with other big ideas.
Right. Oh, as a designer, I have kind of a lab rat, something that I test the constitution of my ideas against. That individual is Homer Simpson. And I figure if Homer will use it, then it certainly will be adopted by the rest of it. So one thing I do when I tell my students or other designers is that we need to do things absolutely green, a positive contribution to the ecology, not things that are efficient, which means less bad, or zero emission, which means totally neutral, I do nothing, but something that returns something back into the ecology, like the treehouse project I showed you, that's fitted into the system. So for instance, if you're a designer in a major company like Gillette, and you're designing yet another razor, this maybe with 7 blades, I don't know what they're up to. Shaved last night, but as I was shaving today, I happen to use this Gillette razor. It's extremely decadent. So why does Dr. J, Mr. Eco, use this poisonous, unassembled, triply packaged object? Well, it's my value system. And when it comes to my face, and I have to do something like go out on a date or look appropriate, I want to be very careful on what goes there, right? I'm not going to use this cheap little Eco blade. So, and most of America would agree. It doesn't matter how much you're paying. So designers need to take this metric, right, this Mach 5 Gillette razor, which is so popular when you're shaving, or I think for the ladies it's the Venus, right, have the exact same thing, be severely green, designed underneath it, almost invisibly, as a major constraint, absolutely good for the environment, and cost less than the current Gillette razor. So we'll buy more. And the thing can look exactly the same. I don't think we need to sell green up front. I know it's mainstream and the revolution's over, but I still think that if we're going to buy this product, it's got to be cheaper and still fitting into our system.
Other lessons that apply to other people on the panel or other people in the room who want to convince Obama or McCain to change something radical?
You told me you were going to ask me this, so I made a list.
Okay.
I think the lessons that I've learned is that it's very important for anybody who wants to get a bureaucracy to implement their idea to find allies. There are going to be people within the system. Some of them are going to oppose you, some of them are going to be indifferent to you, but some of them are your natural allies, and you have to become proactive about building alliances. Some of that comes down to the kind of attitudes that we bring with ourselves into the world every single day. And in my experience, being collaborative and open is always much more effective than thinking about, than being competitive. So if you walk into any environment with an idea and your view is this, hey, this is my idea, y'all get back. That's not going to encourage people to want to work with you at all. It just hinders cooperation. And I would also say, when you're trying to sell an idea, you have to think about the need that your audience has. Who are the people that you're speaking to? And you need to be able to cast the idea in terms of their perspective. What is their need? What are their interests that your idea can fulfill? So when dealing with the military in Iraq and Afghanistan, they know they have a need, they just didn't have the answer for what that was. And you have to figure it out with your own audience. What is it that they need, and how does what I have to offer fulfill that? My last thing is really that partnerships are really important, and you have to find people who can offset your strengths and weaknesses. And my partner in crime is a guy named Colonel Steve Fondacaro, who spent 30 years in the Rangers, graduated from West Point. He's had a career full of combat tours, and he knows how the Byzantine system of the Pentagon works. And when someone like that says, lethal force in a counterinsurgency is counterproductive, that has a very different meaning and a different resonance than when someone like me says it. So if you have a really big, important message to bring, especially to an audience that you're an outsider from, you need to have somebody who can talk directly and in the same language and has a credible experience to be able to make those ideas heard. And that's my list.
I'm going to add one other lesson that we should probably have all learned from Montgomery, who's had incredible success implementing her ideas, is don't be afraid to criticize your superiors, because as we've noticed during the talk, she's criticized the Defense Department, the State Department, and she's allegedly the author of a blog which pokes fun at all sorts of people above her, and yet she continues to have remarkable success. So take that lesson to heart. Parag?
I want to add a corollary actually to what Montgomery said, and that's competition, introducing competition. And I first thought about this more when I was spending some time looking at UN reform, and I saw that the message never got through to anyone there that they need to change. And although I don't support the League of Democracies idea that John McCain has, just the notion that there is going to be a competitive entity out there might actually force people to think differently. Same thing goes for U.S. foreign policy. We think that we've got the best strategy on stabilizing Afghanistan and countering drug production export there. Well, maybe the Shanghai Cooperation Organization will have a better approach to managing the drug outflow, and in some cases and borders it does. We think that that we're the best, democracy promoters. Well, the EU actually has a better track record. Would we expose our leaders to that competition and see that our method is failing? Our climate change policy, George Bush says, yeah, we're really going to be out ahead of the curve. No, we're not. You can see in every European country how far ahead of the game they are in that as well. So when competition stares you in the face and you're losing, I think that really lays bare all of the nonsensical rhetoric that both liberals and conservatives paint in terms of rosy picture around the way we operate. And so, having that stare you in the face or demonstrating and showing those competitive forces is, I think, the best impetus for reform.
The lead agency for coastal projects in the U.S. is the Corps of Engineers. And the Corps of Engineers, despite what some people think, have the U.S. public's best interest at heart. And I think their engineers want to do the best job they can. I think the problem is one of education and one of research, in the sense that the Corps does what they know how to do. And they know how to build things, and they can build levees. And usually they get it right. New Orleans, they didn't get it right, but usually they do a really good job. But they're dealing with, for instance, on the Mississippi River, more than half of the engineering works that have been built on the Mississippi to stop flooding are no longer on the river because the river's moved. Now that's not, it's not really their fault, because it's a very dynamic system. You have to plan that into account. But so I think a lot of it is, they'll change if people say they need to change. In their plans for Louisiana, they're now thinking about buyouts. Instead of building levees here, let's just buy everybody out. Now, what they haven't learned yet is how to interact with the locals, so that they'll zone it so no one will move back in after they buy them out. But so the Corps is evolving, but they need to evolve faster. So I think the fact that they need to be educated and they need to be open and they need to be able to do research. One of the things the Corps has done is they have eaten their research seed corn, so that all of the research monies for the Corps are primarily spent in-house. So Corps engineers, educating Corps engineers, and so there's nothing out to the academic community. There's very little interaction with the rest of the world. The number of Corps employees allowed to go to international conferences is limited. So it's a very insular organization, so it needs to be opened up. There needs to be more research in areas they're interested in, so that they can understand how their works interact with the environment. So I think there's hope.
That's very interesting. All right, so we have about 25 more minutes. So questions either for individuals on the panel or for the panel as a whole, up here in the front.
My question is to this gentleman. If you can, tell us in one sentence what is your new idea. Not for 10 minutes, but one sentence. Understandable for everyone.
In one sentence, it's integrating the civic, private sector, universities, and other institutions of American society into American foreign policy making.
New idea?
Does
Is it new idea?
It's different from how we do it today.
But it's not new idea. Okay.
I hope by that you mean that it's very simple, and therefore we should not have great difficulty.
Thank you for your answer. And I have a question to you. It seems to me that it's, if I will translate in one sentence what you said for about 10 minutes, that it's number one, that you try to educate with social science army. And number two, you prefer to have research money from social science from Department of Defense. About first statement, I think it's very dangerous idea. Because army must defeat enemy, period. It's only one task, not to analyze culture. President needs to analyze culture before he
Get to the question.
order to army to defeat someone. Not army. Army is, they need to do what Commander-in-Chief said, to defeat enemy, not if soldiers or even some law officer will try to involve in social culture. It's a terrible idea.
So Montgomery, do you want to defend why it's not a terrible idea?
Well, I think that the United States military is involved not just in a linear major combat operation in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's involved in something much more complex than that. That involves the reconstruction of the society, establishing legitimate governance. Whatever your feelings about the war, the military is actually doing many things that traditionally have been done by other elements of the United States government. And if the commander-in-chief says, go and do this mission, we're not going to call it nation building, but hey, that's what it is. Then you have to have a force that's prepared to do that.
His mistake.
All right, we got to move on to other questioners. Right here on the second row.
Yeah, I'm Helena Cobbin. I have a book called Re-Engage America and the World After Bush. Dr. Joachim, I love all your ideas. My son is an environmental engineer, MIT. So I think the one thing that I would have loved to have seen is intercity transportation, high-speed bullet trains, get Americans out of the air, out of the airports, push us across the whole of the middle of the country to revive the middle of the country with some good high-speed trains. And that's something that we could really request in the next 4 years for it to get started. Montgomery, I think you left out teaching geography at all levels. I grew up in England, which is a country with a lot of history and not much geography. And we learned geography there as a discipline, from kind of the age of 11 onwards. And I come to this country, I raise my kids here, a country with not much history, but a lot of geography. And geography is not taught as a discipline. It's very hard to, it's not taught in the schools. It's hard to major in it at a university. I mean, that strikes me as very basic and important point. And then just one point for you, Parag, which is, when you were talking at the beginning, you seem to have a bit of a sort of an America, is number one kind of attitude. Like, we have the best NGOs in the world, and we have the best green engineering in the world. And then in your comments later, it seems like, okay, actually the Germans do green engineering better, or, Oxfam does do NGO, relief and development work better. Which do you think it is? I mean, are we number one, or should we actually be more open to saying, it's okay for us to be a team player, we don't have to be number one?
I'm guessing Parag wants to take this one on first.
Well, I mean, I'm hardly known for taking the position that America's number one. If anyone's read my book or reviews of it, so sorry for that confusion. What I was saying was that the things about America that are most respected are not necessarily what its government does, but what those non-state actors do and brands and so forth. And there are many public opinion polls about the respectability of American corporations or overseas and so forth that will validate that claim. First of all, I also really don't like the discourse of hierarchy. Really, I think it's far too complicated an issue to lend itself to that. So I actually shy away from that kind of thing. But can I just really strongly support what you said about geography? Because I went to high school in Germany where geography, they call it Erdkunde, is a very popular major for high school
including
students.
Human geography.
Yeah, even
Yes.
everything. Here, it's non-existent. I happen to have studied geopolitics in college, and I know that geography is very poorly taught. Only a few universities really do it. It doesn't really capture anyone's imagination at the student level, but it does all over Europe and elsewhere. It's a not uncommon major, and I think it's extremely important. And the book I wrote is really about geopolitics and geography, and I wish that more people studied it. So
And in defense of Parag's pro-American bias, we titled our piece in Wired about him, Embrace the Post-American Age. Back there on the right.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank Wired for putting out such a great publication. I think it should be required reading for
Agreed.
anybody over
The whole panel can hear this.
Second of all, I actually have two questions. First is for Mitchell. Wired's last issue, or I think the issue before that, they had an article about Shea Agassi's experiment, and it seems like there's tons of great ideas that are bubbling in terms of the mobility solution, the energy solution. I'm just curious in what cross-fertilization is going on between the various projects. Second question is for Montgomery and Parag. I was just curious in what your opinions are about the AFRICOM idea about engaging NGOs, different bureaucracies of U.S. government, other defense, into one umbrella and as an instrument of foreign policy.
Yeah, I read the last issue of Wired on a plane, and I hadn't heard of the company until that moment. I was surprised. I think I applaud a lot of the work that they're doing.
Can you say briefly what the company's doing?
Essentially, they're involved in the transportation industry or distributing power to vehicles using software or similar things to cell phones. It's basically how do I explain it simply? It's not my company. They're looking at two places, Israel and Australia, I think is the other one, which is essentially an island, how they can rethink all of their mobility systems as electric instead of gas-powered. I think and they're doing it through software, I think that would be my best guess. No, they haven't approached us. We haven't approached them. I just really heard about them. But it's certainly the same thing that we've been thinking about at MIT and at Terraform. As far as the regional transportation question that you brought up, you're preaching to the choir. I completely believe in trains. I took a train here from New York City. Out of all the choices, plane or renting a car, I went by high-speed train, at least as high speed as American trains will go, and ones that I could afford. The Acela was a little bit much more expensive than plane. So the cars or the mobility systems we're working on deal with not the regional condition, but the context of downtown cores, where we see a lot of the congestion and a lot of poisoning of the environment. So we focused on mitigating environmental problems in those specific areas, thinking that the regional transportation system was out of our frame, but certainly in the spectrum, and we'd love to get the opportunity to work on it.
Internodal connections.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, do you want to?
Yeah, just really quickly on Montgomery and Creed, I'll take this one. The best thing that happened to AFRICOM, which stood out formally yesterday or day before, is that it doesn't have an actual formal base in the African continent. The reason is because no country seemed to have wanted it. It also means that rather than having that geographic-based presence where the military winds up just building up larger and larger and larger presence that totally overwhelms every other quote-unquote instrument of national power, civilian or diplomatic and other capabilities, they'll be forced from afar to plan operations, to corral resources, and to go in together for limited objectives that hopefully won't spiral out of control into a variety of occupations. So it will be interesting to see where they first go in to operate, but I can imagine that you have some intersecting trends. You have the NATO and the U.S. not wanting to dominate an intervention in Sudan for Darfur. You have the African Union wanting more resources to try and do something on its own, and other parties wanting to help, including the EU. And then you have some external support that an AFRICOM-like entity could provide, but it should be, rather than dominating operations, it should be supporting them. And I think that by not physically being there, it will have no choice but to play the secondary supporting role rather than trying to do everything itself, which is more likely than not to cause more problems than it solves.
I just have a quick question for Dr. Yakin, which is, if you had to buy a car, and I'm guessing you don't have one since you took the train down there.
I don't have a car.
Okay, but if you had to buy one, what kind would you buy?
I had a pre-owned Honda, so not used, and it was green in color. The salary of a doctoral student doesn't really provide for much else.
All right, so we're down to about 10 minutes, so keep your questions quick unless you have more words of praise for Wired, in which case you can extend them. So,
I'm Diane Perlman. I'm also a social scientist, mostly from psychology, political psychology, conflict. And just like you talked about understanding culture and local culture, there are also basic universal psychological factors that we completely ignore. Like, for example, our policies are usually like domination, control, punishment, sanctions, and right now we're pushing for sanctions, which fail most of the time and are a prelude to war, and security assurances, tension reduction, nonviolent strategies of conflict transformation. So we're in a paradigm that's provoking escalation, and so I think we need also some kind of psychological intelligence or to apply, trying to work this out similar to what you are with anthropology. So could you comment on that?
I couldn't agree more. I think that in addition to sanctions, setting the preconditions for further conflict because of the feeling of deprivation and hostility that they engender, the people who generally suffer from sanctions in a political society are the people who are weakest and have least access to resources. And so it ends up harming the people that you would most like to help, and doing nothing, having no effect on the people you would most like to harm. It's counterproductive, and I think you're right. I mean, there's a need for understanding how other people think and how they view conflict and how we view conflict as part of basic diplomacy.
Which it also has the opposite effect, like strengthening the hardliners, making them more popular and all that.
I completely agree.
in the very back. Yes, you. Blue shirt, glasses, yes.
So, but first of all, I always like Wired because it's a great anagram word, including weird.
That is true.
And also great. A question for Parag and Dr. J in particular, but everybody else. To follow up on this earlier question from the geography lady, you talk about globalization and international companies. What can be, and I've seen some of these great ideas like you have coming from Europe, coming from Asia. What about some international collaboration, cooperation? Is it likely as possible to be endorsed and embraced by the next administration? And how do you focus on where companies or organizations, NGOs or otherwise, who have great ideas, can bring them together to accelerate some of these, whether it's in transportation, engineering, other applications like aging, health aging issues, or just health issues in general?
From my side, I'm certainly friendly to our neighbors and others across the sea. But I think as far as technology companies and car companies, they've done a really good job. So a lot of the work that I've been doing is I've been engaged and sponsored by American car companies or American energy companies or American design companies. So I think, and that's certainly a large constituency in and of itself. Doesn't mean that, at least for me, my doors are not closed. Our office is very international. We have a Bulgarian, a German. Gosh, never mind. But yeah, we're certainly open for all kinds of thought. As far as the policy to do that, I provide choice. I show designs and inventions from cities to vehicles to whatever, so that there's something tangible that one can connect to and decide I don't like it or I do, or how can we modify that, as opposed to just discussions in the air. There's something there that we can see, and that could be reified.
Public health is the area that's by far the most advanced in terms of where pharmaceutical companies are being brought in either by the Clinton Initiative or the Gates Foundation or foreign governments to actually lower the cost of drugs, to run pilot programs, to do all kinds of testing and things like this. So public health is really an example where you have huge numbers of public-private partnerships from Equatorial Guinea to Botswana to literally everywhere in the world. You have a corporate role, you have UPS and DHL helping to deliver supplies, and you really have this top-to-bottom chain of everyone involved in getting some public good delivered. And so health is ahead of other sectors, and I think we might see things follow. You raise one technology example because we want to promote democracy and liberalism in the Middle East and other places, but we spend almost no money on what is really the cheapest way to go about that, which is just promoting internet access and usage in those countries. And when I travel in the Arab world, internet cafes are packed morning till night around the clock, not just because it's hot, because people actually want to have some kind of social connectivity. We could do a lot more to promote that kind of psychological, liberal kind of change on the grassroots level amongst the young, which are, of course, the youth bulge in these countries constitute a majority of the population. And it would cost a lot less than the kind of heavy-handed stuff we do today. But we don't put nearly enough resources or thinking into that.
Right here in the front.
You said that because of the bureaucracy within the DoD right now, we don't have much hope of achieving too much more integration of sociocultural understanding in the next 4 years. But how do you see us being able to work with allies and collaborators to understand the culture in the areas we're engaged in? How do you see us interacting with allies?
Well, first I would go back and clarify. It's not that I said I don't think we have much hope of improving sociocultural understanding. I was talking about big systemic changes, some of the ones that I indicated having to do with change in the investment portfolio, change in the organizational structure. These things, they take a long time to do. But in terms of your specific question, which is about engaging with allies overseas?
Yeah, possibly other governments in the region, or possibly even NGOs that have more experience dealing with the culture.
Well, it would be highly beneficial were the United States government to do that, to reach out proactively to other governments in the region, both local governments and also our allies. And that does happen. In some cases, that does happen. With NGOs, it's a little bit more difficult because a lot of NGOs, I guess you could put it simply like this and say that the military is from Mars and NGOs are from Venus. And very often, the Army would really like to talk to NGOs because they know what's going on in a particular place. They know, who owns the water rights in this particular community. They know who the power holders are. They know the best way to communicate with the population. And sometimes, even though the goals are exactly the same, NGOs are very suspicious or skeptical of working with the Army, which is completely understandable. So, if you're willing to talk to somebody, that person also has to be willing to talk to you for collaboration.
The last question in the back left there.
I have a question for Dr. J about your Homer Simpson principle. I'm wondering what kind of research you've done into the emotional connections that people feel to their cars.
Could you speak up? I'm sorry. Yeah.
What kind of research have you done regarding the emotional connections that people feel to their cars? And secondarily, what type of quantum leaps do consumers need to make in order to prep the marketplace for some of the brilliant blue sky concepts that you presented here today?
All right. Okay, great question. I do no market research. No groups filtering any of the reasoning that we do. Doesn't mean that it's a bad idea, it's just not something we do. But we design things for change, and will people accept them based on our notion of the American value system? Well, it depends on a big thing that's time. And I think that it eventually will happen if we prove the constitution of these ideas, demo them, show that they're working, and prototype them. Then it's a matter of only so much time before some of these things begin to happen. They're cropping out from many different visions in all different areas. But that time is pretty crucial. If you think of cell phone technology, telecommunications, it took about 5 to 7 years for everyone to adopt. Hybrid fuel cell cars, I mean, certainly were around for a very long time. The first car was electric. It took about 15 years before you could buy one on the lot. That's about it. If you want to change building technologies, a massive paradigm shift, it's about 40 years. And cities take at least 100 years to change. So what we're doing is we're investing in propagating these visions so that others can see them and discuss them, critique them, start making them happen. I don't know if we can sit down and, in a market research group and pick what their favorite color would be just yet, kind of thing. But certainly thinking that, Americans are smart and just like us, and they're going to find something that's going to solve, big problems like our dependency on oil. And these are some of the solutions that we are producing to do just that.
Any last comments from the panelists? Anything that's been itching to say?
Thank you for inviting us.
Well, thank you for coming. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for coming. These are the